I'm Paul Comfort, and on this episode of Transit Unplugged, we bring you into the eye of the storm. Unlike any other podcast out there, we're taking you down to Florida right after their two hurricanes back-to-back, Helene and Milton, and talking to 6 public transportation CEOs. That's right, 6 of them across the state. They had 2 back-to-back storms that really battered the state. We wanted to take you inside the response. How does a public transit system in the state of Florida or any state respond to a major hurricane or a major natural disaster such as this? Well, today you're going to find out right from the leaders of the public transportation and the highway system in that area. We begin with Brad Miller. Brad is CEO of PSTA, the Pinellas Suncoast Transit Authority, right in Clearwater at St. Petersburg, which was at the epicenter of the storm. The storm, as you may recall, Milton, the most recent one, was coming right up and was aimed right for them in Tampa, and then at the last minute swerved slightly south. He tells you how he rode out the storm in his house, how the storms were roaring around him, how their public transit system responded, the roof of Tropicana Field being lifted right off by the winds. You'll hear it right from someone who lived right through it and how they responded. Amazing. We'll also hear from Coree Lonergan, the CEO and general manager of Broward County Transit on the other side of the state where the storm went through, and the impact that the tornadoes, over 150 tornadoes that went through the area of Florida afterwards, and the response that they had to those. We also speak with Ivan Maldonado, who is the new executive director of PalmTran, and he talks about how they prepared for the storm in the EOC and the coordination that is so much required between public transit agencies and the public government agencies that are around them, such as the counties and the public works department, the sewer department, the road department, all the things that have to be coordinated. We also hear from Tiffany Homler Hawkins, who is the CEO of the transit system in Orlando, Florida, where Disney and so many of those are, called LYNX. And she talks about their response and how they don't charge for people when they're riding out to go to hurricane relief centers and storm centers and all the different impacts, and how her team, not one member of her team called off when they were back in service, because they understand the role of a transit system in being a first responder and really part of the essential services of a region. We also speak with Dech. Dave Dech is the executive director of SFRTA, commonly known as TriRail, which is the commuter regional rail, which comes up from Miami all the way through all these counties that were affected. He talks about how they work together with those agencies to provide great service and the importance of keeping the railways clear so that CSX and others can bring in supplies after a storm. And then we speak with Greg Slater. Greg Slater is a former colleague of mine. He was Secretary of Transportation here in Maryland and was head of the State Highway Administration when I was head of the Maryland Transit Administration. Now he's down in Florida as CEO and Executive Director of the Tampa Hillsborough Expressway Authority. I thought it was important to have someone kind of wrap it up and explain to us the role of the road network during a major disaster like this and how they coordinate so closely with public transit agencies to ensure like traffic lights and all the things that are required for buses to work in a region. This is a coordinated effort, and this is a look inside the storm at how public transit agencies help a region prepare for, endure, and recover from a major disaster, a natural disaster such as these back-to-back hurricanes, Helene and Milton. Stay tuned for some great information that you won't get anywhere else except right here on Transit Unplugged. Hey, great to have with us Brad Miller, my good friend, who is the CEO of PSTA, Pinellas Suncoast Transit Authority in the Tampa Bay area and Clearwater. Thank you so much for being with us today, Brad.
Oh, I'm glad to be here too.
Yeah, man, I bet you are after all of that.
Yeah.
So what the heck happened, man? Fill us in.
Oh, yeah. Well, I have been a CEO down here in St. Petersburg, Florida, Clearwater area for 13 years now.
Okay.
Lucky 13, I guess.
There you go.
Unlucky, I don't know. Because this is the first time that we've had not one, but 2 hurricanes, Hurricane Helene and then now Hurricane Milton, come very close to the Tampa Bay and have major impacts on the Tampa Bay region. Certainly the biggest impacts since I've been here, and now historic with Hurricane Milton, historic impacts to the large Tampa Bay region,
right?
Which is like 4+ million people. This is probably the biggest impact they've had in their lifetime. So, yeah.
That's crazy, man. I know. Back to back. So walk us through it a little bit. Walk us through what happened, and then we'll get into your response, how transit really stepped in and helped kind of save the day.
Yeah, sure. Yeah. So, well, first, I'm not originally from Florida. I'm from Pennsylvania and worked in Virginia. I think where you and I met first a long time ago. And then, so when I got to Florida, I was just amazed at how like professional and integrated transit systems and the whole hurricane responses throughout Florida. I mean, there are professionals that this is what they do all the time because there's a lot of risk here. And so certainly we have it down pat on what our operational plans are and everything like that. But just in the last 2 weeks, toward the last week of September, Hurricane Helene came straight up the west coast of Florida and actually kind of landed ground just a little bit east of Tallahassee up in the Panhandle area. But it was only about 100 miles offshore, and that was the biggest impact of what is storm surge, where the hurricane winds blow basically the Gulf of Mexico saltwater onto land. And it was like a record number, especially along the beaches, like Clearwater Beach, which is a huge tourist area, all the way down the beaches, basically inundated, and a lot of damage. Basically, oh my gosh, you could see it, the sand from the sandy white beach, and then basically all just got lifted and plopped right on the roadway that runs down the Barrier Islands. And I see you see like up in Buffalo and stuff, like cars totally submerged under snow. It looked the same way, but there were cars under sand. It was really, really, really bad. And a lot of people did lose their transportation, lost their cars. So they were looking to transit to get them to FEMA had set up a whole bunch of food sites and things like that. And so that was a kind of a surprise. I mean, the rest of the hurricane kind of missed the Tampa Bay, but just the way the wind went, it pushed all that water into storm surge, and a lot of low-lying areas around the Tampa Bay really got a major hit of storm surge, and so people actually lost their lives that couldn't get out of their house fast enough. And so that was really devastating. And then just about 6 days later, we get Hurricane Milton. And this one that we just got back in the office today from hit last Thursday, Wednesday night into Thursday, was a wind and rain storm like there has not been in the Tampa Bay's history. It luckily, actually touched ground a little south of us down in the Sarasota, Bradenton area of Florida on the west coast of Florida. And then it just went basically straight up the I-4 corridor, past St. Petersburg, Tampa, up to Orlando. I think it was still even rated a hurricane as it went past Orlando, and then out the other side on the Atlantic Ocean side. But it was the north side. We were on the north side, and that was where the worst wind and rain was for this hurricane. It was Cat 3, 100-mile-an-hour winds right in my neighborhood where I live. Wow. I was here. My family had luckily evacuated, and a lot of people did evacuate. I stayed through it. I was in my house. I had my headphones in, and then I would take them out. It was roaring for like 6 hours of just incredible wind, the noise inside the house. I mean, we're all good, safe. There wasn't really much storm surge with this, just because the winds were going in a different direction. Actually, it's kind of fascinating. The water goes away from that.
Yeah, they said it kind of sucked the water out of the Tampa Bay or something.
Yeah, it sucks it out, and it's kind of
weird.
I could walk to Tampa. But this one was a lot of down trees and, of course, power. 90% of the million people that live in my county were without power. So many hundreds of thousands are without power. Tampa, same thing, about over half of Hillsborough County. So down trees, down power lines, that's been the main thing. Of course, that also basically eliminates the traffic lights because there's no power. It's very treacherous driving, on the roadways. So a real major impact, just a 1-2. So we're just all very happy and blessed to still be here. We're doing just fine.
So, all right. Yeah. So that's what happened. That's a great description. Thank you for that. Kind of a first person review of what happened, all that rain and everything. Did your car get like flooded out by all the rain coming up underneath of it, or could you drive it? Or how did that affect your buses and your facilities and all that?
Yeah, well, very luckily, no. I'm totally fine, and I live in a little bit higher ground area.
Okay.
For hurricane,
that's smart.
Right. For both Hurricane Helene and Milton, there was evacuations. There's mandatory evacuations that the counties all go through, depending on where the storm's coming. And so for Milton, this last one, there was the biggest evacuation I've ever seen. Mandatory evacuations. Every county in Florida is all organized to have like zones A, B, C, D, E, F, whatever, based on your height above sea level. And luckily I live in zone D, pretty high. It's 27 feet above sea level, so I'm fine. They evacuated in my county A, B, and C, mandatory. So over half the county evacuated.
And where do they go? Just up the road north?
Well, yeah, if you look at the traffic on I-75 up to Atlanta, up I-95. This time, since it was the West Coast of Florida, mostly I-75, just totally jam-packed all the way to Atlanta.
Yeah.
So people from Florida fleeing the storm. And this, because it came just 2 weeks after the last hurricane, and that was really devastating, I do think over half the population completely evacuated.
They took it seriously.
They really took it seriously this time, which was really good, in a sense. But now, even today, the traffic is incredible on coming back because they're all finally coming back.
Yeah.
Today, so I've heard really kind of nightmare stories about folks coming back. But the transit systems are really essential to every county in Florida's response to these storms. We all have a full-blown emergency operations center. At least where I had come from in the past, they had used like a room in City Hall or something for something like this, but for emergencies. But here, they're the permanent facilities that are just in there. They have a permanent director. And it's a very sort of command control kind of setup where we always have people there 24/7 during a storm. And the requests come down to us and we provide the evacuations. This one was so big and threatening to come right to us that they actually relied on us just running our regular bus service. The evacuation centers that they set up are the schools. They closed down the schools and then they set them up in high schools, the evacuation centers. And supposedly on this storm was a record like 9 or 10,000 people actually went into the evacuation sites, the schools and churches and things. And our bus network serves all those schools pretty effectively just with its regular route. So we ran our regular service until late on at their request Tuesday because and it becomes free, and that's the best, most frequent way to get as many people access to the evacuation centers. And like I said, Helene had taken out a lot of people's cars and our transportation, so that was even more necessary. So we did carry a lot of people to the evacuation centers. And then, of course, we just inundated with specific requests. And maybe you heard from the other folks that you talked to about the same kind of request where low-lying nursing homes and medical facilities and things like that. Of course, we have the largest fleet of wheelchair accessible vehicles in the county.
Sure.
With our paratransit vehicles and with our buses all having wheelchair accessibility. So we're called to those sort of special need to evacuate all those folks that need a wheelchair accessible vehicle to get out, or a hospital.
Oh, right.
And there's dozens of those locations in the evacuation zone that we carried close to 10,000 people away.
Wow, Brad.
Before the storm hit, and then certainly right after. Even today, we're doing a lot of special movements of buses, but again, it is just so well integrated. Now, the only way we can do that is I've just got a fantastic staff who has us down to a T and did such a fantastic job this time. We have to make sure that our fleet and our facilities and all of our employees are safe first, and then we can provide this service, the essential service to the county, to the citizens. We moved all of our buses to higher ground because the facility, of course, most bus garages, I think, United States are built in flood zones, probably. But so we're in zone B. So we evacuated our buses to higher ground themselves. We did that Wednesday, right before the storm hit, and then left some buses, our older buses, just in case something bad happens. We don't want one of our brand new buses to get messed up, to provide the evacuation services as long as we can. Our policy is we will run, it's really for the safety of the riders. We will run until sustained storm force winds of 45. And that's what we did.
Okay.
And it really were appreciated, I know, but the county very much relied on public transit to help them get the people safe.
You helped evacuate at least 10,000 people.
Yeah.
That's amazing, Brad.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. And I think, and I know, I don't think the numbers were, we're right on the Gulf of Mexico, and probably got the highest, the most impact to our county, but Tampa, just right behind us, they also, same thing, same exact thing. They evacuated in certain zones. The system on that side of the bay did the same thing at their emergency operations center, providing evacuations to get people out of harm's way.
Right. I heard the roof of Tropicana Field got ripped off, and where they were having first responders there, and that was their shelter. And then that got, wow, that's like biblical proportions.
I know. Yeah, it was incredible just like to see that. And then, oh my gosh, the roof is gone on that facility. That's certainly a huge challenge. Luckily, there was nobody in there, nobody injured, amazingly. And they had sent a warning out before this, but downtown St. Petersburg, one of our main areas that we serve, is just really booming economically. And there's maybe, I don't know, 7, 8, maybe a dozen of those big, huge cranes building buildings. And they said, be wary of those cranes with hurricane force winds. And one toppled over and basically landed on top of the Tampa Bay Times newspaper building.
Oh, wow.
And kind of crushed the corner of it. And it almost right in the downtown core of St. Petersburg, where our BRT goes, it probably missed our BRT station right in that part of that area by about 30 feet or so.
Oh, my goodness.
And it still is lying there on the street down below. That was also incredible.
Yeah. So what's happening now? Now that it's over, I hear that there's still a lot of people without power. And what's your role in transit to help kind of recover?
Yeah, well, it just continues on. You're exactly right. Probably the biggest thing that we're dealing with now in our county is the lack of power. And so that certainly a nursing home or a hospital or something like that in an area that doesn't have power can't go back yet. Can't have their folks go back there without power. Now, a lot of like the major hospitals and everything have emergency backup, have generators and things like that. So we're talking mostly like smaller nursing homes or maybe senior living facilities and stuff like that. So we're still providing, even as of today, we did some like 200 people get people back still today. Supposedly they're going to have all the power back by tomorrow, and we can maybe get back to some resemblance of normalcy. This time, I think largely due to the lack of power at gas stations, there was a run on gas, very long lines to get gas at places. Our paratransit system, which is heavily used during the hurricane, the cabs and the Ubers, that we use a lot of here, they're having trouble getting gas. And so PFA has big tanks, and we have a lot of unleaded fuel also. We opened up our facility to basically fill up all of the taxi cabs to keep that service going. Just in the last couple of days, we've been doing that too.
Wow. Yeah, that's interesting. Huh? You don't think about that.
Right. Yeah. I mean, the taxis, the Ubers, those are critical to our paratransit network, getting people. Everybody's power has been out, so now they need to go to Publix or the grocery store more often because their refrigerator doesn't work. Just everything is just out of sorts right now. It's going to take our community a while. The destruction from the storm surge from the first hurricane along our coastlines, and then this the power and the last being out. It's a real challenge, but we're just grateful that by and large our employees are all safe and accounted for, and they incredible work getting so many people to safety and really helping out. And I'm grateful for them and the great work that they've done.
It's something. Well, thank you for joining us today, Brad, and kind of filling us in from a first-person perspective for those around the country and the world who listen here. Is there any kind of final, you've done this a few times now, any lessons learned from your perspective that you would share with other people in preparing for, a natural disaster of this type?
Oh, yeah, thank you. And we are always learning, what goes wrong, what we can do better, what can be more efficient through every storm. And we're trying to make those adjustments. I would certainly say, and I didn't know any of this before I really came down here to Florida, and then I've just been sort of indoctrinated in it. Have a plan, have a procedure in place on how you're going to make decisions on, service. We work very carefully with our union to include them in the discussions. Now with the power of Zoom like this, we have Zoom calls replacing like in-person meetings a lot because we're all in our evacuation spots or at home. And communication is probably the number one lesson I've learned is key from myself as the CEO and the leader of the organization. And I'm interacting with the leaders of the other public organizations, the cities, the first responders and things like that, on down to make sure that we can really be there for the community when they need us.
Yeah. That's amazing. Yeah, Greg Slater was telling me that, you guys were coordinating with him because your vehicles are running on their roads, and there's so much interagency cooperation and coordination happening behind the scenes that the public doesn't see, but it's critical. And then, the other folks who are on later on today's episode will be talking about all the preparation and planning and the tabletop exercises and all the things that go into this, like you said, these are real professionals that have been doing this for a long time. And it's not second nature, but you have to have a plan, you have to coordinate and communicate, and then you have to be able to execute, right?
Oh, absolutely. And to your point, it is great, the relationships and the just everyone working together in the Tampa Bay area, but then across the state in the transit world even.
Yes.
I have been in communication with Tiffany Homler in Orlando, Nat Ford in Jacksonville, our State Transit Association, Lisa McCoe up in Tallahassee, of course, the Florida DOT, the Expressway Authority. Yeah, everybody has called me up and said, is there anything that they can do to help me, or coordinate with them in any way? It's been fantastic support for us. Yeah.
Well, thanks for sharing with us today. We wish you all the best in the recovery. We know it's just really starting now that people can get back into the offices and that your power comes back on. Thank you for sharing it with us today, Brad.
Thank you. Thank you, Paul.
Great to have with us my good friend Dave Dech, who is executive director of what's known as TriRail, but it's the what is it again, Dave?
It's a mouthful. It's the South Florida Regional Transportation Authority.
That's it. Yeah. Beautiful, man. So, and today, you're also on the board of.
Just finished the board meeting for the Commuter Rail Coalition.
So right, Commuter Rail Coalition. Yeah. Yes. That's a very big organization, isn't it?
And growing.
And
growing. Yeah. It's, I think we represent to this point about 98% of all commuters that run on these trains are represented on this association.
Well, for those of you who watch our television show, Transit Unplugged TV, you might recall Dave was one of the stars of our episode in South Florida, Miami. We rode his service, went to the Yellow-Green Market with Coree Lonergan, who was on today's episode. And then you showed us a station that you had built right in with Miami-Dade in the downtown area. And I know you continue to coordinate very closely with your transit partners, right?
Yeah, we've got the beautiful Miami Central station that we share with Brightline. Brightline built that station. We have the platforms that we own in there that connects over to Government Center and connects you to the Metro Rail and then to the Metro Mover. So yeah, it's really good to see all those pieces start to come together as the way it should be. I mean, it's all about connectivity.
That's right. Yeah, especially in South Florida there. So along those lines, actually, it's a great segue to what I wanted to ask you about, which is preparation. So we've talked with some of the CEOs about execution on the day of service, and you run a rail line. Tell us what you run so that people are clear on that, and then we'll dive into kind of preparation. Yeah.
So we run commuter rail, and we run through 3 counties. Our northernmost station is our Mangonia Park station in Palm Beach County, and we run through Palm Beach, Broward, and then Miami-Dade County.
Right. And you told me one time a good way for people who aren't familiar with it geographically, you kind of parallel I-95, right?
Oh, yes. We are. There's no better way to get off 95 than to find.
I love that. So let's take our minds back a week or so when Hurricane Milton was bearing down on Florida. The preparations that were required for all transit agencies, which is what I'd like you to focus on, was tremendous because this thing looked like it was going to be a monster. I mean, I heard people saying it could be the worst or one of the very worst in history. And then what happened, Dave?
Well, we were watching it because as we're watching the models and everything, and we have a very prescribed, where we are in South Florida, we have a very prescribed hurricane preparedness plan. We go over it every year. We make sure we have our supplies. We make sure everybody's up on the plan. We make sure our generators are filled. All those things we do every year. So then it just becomes a matter of executing that plan based on whatever variables the storm throws at you. So while we were initially watching, it really looked like it was going to go far enough north on the coast that we weren't going to have to do much.
Okay.
And we're fortunate that we have great partners in South Florida. So we were having 3 and 4 times a day calls with the Florida East Coast Railroad and Brightline. And they had their weather people on there with just these really great in-depth analyses of the weather. So when it took a turn south, we said, okay, now we need to make a decision. And our hurricane preparedness plan calls for if there's going to be wind speeds, the sustained wind speeds above 40 miles an hour, we must start to secure gates. So that's what we start to worry about are the crossing arms and crossing gates, because they can become projectiles. They could, so they become more of a hazard. So once it became clearly, like even the morning of, they were starting to project sustained wind gusts, sustained wind speeds of 55 to 60 miles an hour. So that became a no-brainer.
Yeah.
We got to, it was just in the Palm Beach County area.
Okay.
So we made the decision that we're, starting with the service on Wednesday morning, I think it was, that we were going to suspend service Wednesday, Thursday, where we would start securing gates. So
how do you do that? What do you do? Like wrap a chain around it or something?
So it's your chain or rope. You can lash anything shorter than 25 feet. Will secure. Okay. Anything longer than 25 feet will remove because they just do that. So, and that's where it becomes a lengthy process. So we removed over 100 gate arms and then, secured the rest in Palm Beach County. And then, again, we made sure all of our generators are up. We made sure we had a source for diesel fuel. We made sure that we had, light plants stationed throughout the area in case we lost power in the station. We put our signal people all in rest. Of course, our signal people are all hours of service. They can only work so many hours in a day. So then you start thinking ahead, okay, I've got to put these people down for rest so that when the storm hits, I have people available to go out and work. So we were going through all those preparations. And then fortunately for us, that the eye hit the eye wall and the south end of the eye of the storm kind of opened up and released a lot of the energy on the south end. So we didn't get the winds that we anticipated. I'd much rather be prepared and not get the wind than not be prepared and get it. So I still think we made the right decision to curtail our operations. And we did sustain damage to our Mangonia Park station. We lost a lot of the roofing in the station, so we'll have to make some repairs there. We had some light poles down, a lot of trees down.
Now, was that due to the hurricane or was that due to tornadoes?
It was a little bit of both.
Okay, all right.
The tornadoes were scary. I mean, it's, if you look at my house in particular, I had no damage. I had a flower pot that was blown over.
Okay.
But if you go up a mile or two from my house or a couple miles where they had the tornadoes and there's entire neighborhoods just completely devastated. I'm sure you probably some of the images on Instagram. And that was just north of us. I have a friend of mine sending me pictures from his backyard of a tornado in his backyard. So we were very fortunate that we sustained what I think is very minimal damage for what we were expecting from the storm. And we were back up and operating on Friday morning.
That's great. And so what I want to just kind of focus on for our listeners is the amount of preparations that go into getting ready for a storm. I was interviewing Greg Slater, who is the head of the Tampa Hillsborough Expressway Authority. Greg was head of the State Highway Administration when I was head of the Maryland Transit Administration together in Baltimore. We went through a storm we called Snowmageddon, where we, the roads and the transit, which is on the roads, we coordinated dramatically and we ended up shutting down all service, everything for like 2 days, which is something you almost never do in transit, shut it all down, but we had to. But he said it's so different handling hurricanes because, in snowstorms, you're trying to keep everything open, keep the roads open so people can get through. But in a hurricane, it's close everything down and stay home. So it's a whole different mode.
It is. Yeah, you're exactly right. My life up north, you want to keep the roads, keep driving on them because
that's right. Yeah, you got to keep them passable. Yeah.
So we went through because even though we were going to shut down our operation, we have CSX that operates. We have CSX on the southern end of the railroad was still workable. So we had dispatchers around the clock still. But you think about you arrange hotel rooms. You get your phone list, so you do wellness checks, for people, when the storm goes through, you want to make sure all your teammates are okay, because it's not just affecting the railroad. We have a lot of people who live up north who,
right.
and so now we're worried about, are they okay? Are their families okay? Are their houses okay? But it's an exhaustive list of preparation. Some of it you don't think about, right? So, I mean, you got to keep your locomotives running in these kind of storms because you don't want the water to go into those exhaust stacks. It just
you got to keep the train running.
Exactly. So then when you're like some of our places like Palm Beach, they don't really like us to keep locomotives running. So now we're restaging our locomotives into the yard where we would normally leave them up north so that we could the ones that have to stay running. And then we have like exhaust port covers that we go up and we lash around.
Yeah.
And then, so you're doing that, and you need to make sure that, your water filtration and your filtration sites are all going to keep working no matter what. They don't care if the storm's coming or not. Your sewage and your raw water and everything still needs to be processed. And then you start looking at your, we ordered in, I think, 200 tons of ballast and had that staged, along the thing. We make sure all of our tampers and our regulators and our on-track equipment and everything, we go out, start it up, make sure it's running, because you just don't know. You're going to need those things after the storm. And that's not finding out after the storm that it's not running is the wrong time.
Yeah. Wow, that's something. Yeah, so much that people don't think about. And then were you a part of the Emergency Operations Center? Did you have staff over there in any of the counties you were at?
So we did not have staff over there. I stayed in very close communication with Coree and Ivan and U.S. down in Miami, and then our staffs all talk. So our directors of security and safety talk to Broward, talk to Palm Beach, Miami-Dade, all the EOC, so that we can coordinate. And then, the biggest thing for us, especially in a storm of this magnitude that we were expecting, is, our role then can be more vital, not really moving people around, but opening up that track, get out of the way. So if CSX needs to bring in, supplies or or water or, whatever it is, it's a vital outlet there to keep that railroad running. So that if things are down in South Florida, you've got CSX and the FEC can kind of bring in all that freight infrastructure that's needed. Oh, yeah.
That's amazing. I didn't think about all the supplies. Yeah. Now, do you work with your contractor, Transdev, on doing all that? Are they integral to all this?
Oh, yes, it is arm in arm with Transdev and Herzog and Allied Universal. They were on all the weather calls, and we had a call following that to make sure we were all coordinated. It really was. You hate to say you get good at it because we get to practice this a couple times a year. But we, you run into that, just kind of routine of making sure that you're ready.
That's good. Well, Dave, thanks for making time for us today. I know you're on a busy schedule there, and I'm really happy that, you sustained minimal damage, both personally and your operations. And we'll plan to be back down there in South Florida again later in 2025 to do a follow-up on all the great news you all have coming out of South Florida. And congratulations on your ridership recovery there at TriRail. I think you're leading the nation in the way of reorienting what might be traditional commuter service to now adapt to the more hybrid work schedule by opening up the schedules and making them more of a regional rail.
Yeah, it's, we're very pleased with our results, and we're just going to continue to drive, continue to increase our reliability and make that customer experience better. I mean, that's really what it all boils down to.
Great to have Coree Lonergan with us today on the show. She is CEO and General Manager of Broward County Transit. Those who watch our TV show got to see her on our South Florida episode. Coree, thank you so much for being here today.
Thank you all for having me, and hello to the audience. So glad to be here today, and want to welcome you back to South Florida as soon as possible, Paul.
Oh, good. I'd love to be down there now that it's getting cold up here in Maryland. Hey, Coree, you guys today's show is about the impact that public transit has in responding to natural disasters, such as the back-to-back hurricanes that you just suffered there in Florida. Tell us about that and where you all are at today.
Yeah, so it's a really good question, Paul, and thank you again for allowing us the opportunity to talk about it. Yes, we did have 2 back-to-back hurricanes here in Florida. Fortunately for us, in both cases, we weren't immediately impacted by them. We didn't sustain a direct hit. However, with Milton, we did have some bands that came through that we got some very strong gusts, but we didn't get sustained winds. For us, we look at sustained winds of over 39 miles an hour. And if they get to that point, then we start to close down our service and we don't operate. So we didn't have that situation. So we were so fortunate. But I do want to send my well wishes out to our colleagues on the West Coast and in Central Florida that did take direct hits. They're doing amazing jobs recovering there, and my thoughts are with them for sure. But for us, we were able, fortunately, to keep our service running the entire time. We did have only one detour, and that was because of flooding in one of the local cities here called Hollywood. For those that are familiar, Hollywood Beach. Well, our Route 6 had to be detoured for about 2 or 3 days because of flooding. Other than that, we ran our normal paratransit service, our normal fixed bus route service, and we were able during that time to carry a ridership of about 100,000.
Wow, that's something. Even though the hurricane didn't hit you as bad, I understand that there were some tornadoes. Did you get any of those in your county?
We did. We did get some tornadoes touch down here in Broward very briefly. They did some damage. Fortunately, from a transit perspective, we weren't impacted by that.
And I saw a picture of you online at your EOC. I mean, that was activated, right? And you all had some plans. You all prepare for these, right? I mean, a lot of folks don't realize, having been a county administrator myself, there's so many practice sessions that people have. Have you been involved in any of those?
Yes. In fact, our planning for the hurricane season starts back in the beginning of the summer, actually here in Broward. And we do have multiple drills, tabletop drills, where we test how our responses are going to be under various scenarios. So it's taken very seriously here in Broward. And so we do have people that are dedicated to watching the weather and establishing what the protocol for response is going to be based on weather reports. And that obviously triggers certain reactions from a county perspective on how we respond to them. But it's taken very seriously here. As you know, we're kind of the hurricane capital of the country down here in Florida. Not something that we're proud of, but that's a fact. And so because of that, hurricane season is very important to us and always top of mind. And the preparations are very rigid and important.
Thankfully, that the impact there in your county wasn't as bad. Well, thank you for joining us today, Coree, for this brief update. We'll come back and film an episode of our TV show there in Broward, and maybe in a few months we can also do another podcast update. You've got so much going on. Great to have with us my good friend Ivan Maldonado, who is Executive Director of PalmTran, the transit agency in Palm Beach County, Florida. Ivan, thanks for joining us on today's podcast.
Thank you, Paul. I appreciate this interview.
Yeah, man. Ivan and I were pals when he was director of transportation at Hart, Hillsborough Transit in Tampa. Then after that, he went over for a few years to Omaha and now is back in Florida for the last couple months. Many people will remember Clinton Forbes, who was a great leader in our industry, passed away tragically too soon. I'm really happy you're back there. I think they've got a great, strong leader in you to help kind of pick up where Clinton left off.
Yes, and I knew Clinton very well, met him when I was at Star Metro in Tallahassee, and he worked at JTA.
Oh,
Good
right.
person. Good
That's
person.
right. Oh, yeah. Yeah. So you guys know each other a long time. So how long have you been in this job, Ivan, as Executive Director of PalmTran?
Just a little over 2 months.
Okay. So as soon as you get in the job, what happens? But you have Hurricane Helene come in, and then a couple weeks later, Milton. I mean, boom, boom. What a way to get started, huh?
Yes, it's a way to get you back acclimated into Florida.
Yeah, I mean, you had your fill of those storms, I know, when you were in Tampa, but tell me about the impact. I've got a good friend who lives there in West Palm, and he was saying that, his neighborhood was fine, but 2 neighborhoods away, tornadoes came and just ripped the whole place up. So it was kind of wild, huh?
Correct. We were obviously hoping for the best, anticipating that we probably needed to be prepared for the worst. And what got us was the tornadoes, and actually devastated a couple of towns in Palm Beach County. Actually, where I live right now, which is Palm Beach Gardens, was an area that was affected by tornadoes.
Oh, man. Wow. Tell me about that. What was it like? Were you there when it touched down?
No, I was actually at the Emergency Operations Center, so
Okay.
It did not affect me directly, and my home was not affected by it. But I know that it was a tragic situation. And what's amazing about that, because it brings back memory, when I was in Omaha, we had a major tornado that actually encompassed almost a 3-mile range. I didn't realize that tornadoes could get that big until I got to Omaha. So the results of that tornado was devastating. I've never seen anything like it until I got to Omaha. So yeah, they can be very devastating.
Yeah. So this hurricane comes across. The initial track had it hitting right between Clearwater and Tampa. Then it moved south, and it moved south quite a bit, maybe 40 or 50 miles, and then crossed the whole state. You're on the other side of the state. So tell us about what happened, where you were, and the role of your transit agency. What was going on during that time?
So I'm very thankful for the Palm Beach County and everyone's involvement here. We were obviously tracking the storm for a couple of days before it came in. The county administrator, the county commissioners, the different department heads, emergency management, they were on point tracking the storm. But we were at the EOC multiple days, making sure we had all the preparations in place, anticipating the storm. So we were very thankful for our area. And as I'm saying this right now, I have reached out to some of the other transit systems like Hart and PSTA that were affected a lot more than we were, Manatee County, for example. So the storm actually proceeded somewhat northeast, so we weren't necessarily affected by it severely. We had a lot of shrubs and things down, but we were able to resume services practically the very next day. We started notifying customers that services might be interrupted. But what was interesting about this whole plan, we wanted to make sure that we got people safely to shelters. So the day before the storm, we wanted to make sure that they knew what options they had available to get to the different shelters. So we ensured that our services continued to operate as long as it was needed before we pulled services back inside. We started to get pretty strong winds. So we were going to close services by 12. But the county administrator made the decision to continue to operate services as needed to get people to the regular shelters and the special needs services. So we got information out there that we'll continue to make sure that we'll get them there. If we needed to get supervisor vehicles out there, we would do whatever was necessary. Information was very thorough. We had our call center, all modes of communications available to them, so they could call if we needed to coordinate special services. We were able to get people safely to the shelters, and then we were able to pull services back up. Everyone did a fantastic job. The supervisors, the operator, in good spirits, always obviously concerned about their safety, but also concerned about the safety of our customers. And the day of the storm, obviously, by that time, we had everyone in place where they needed to be at. But we were grateful to hear that we would not be affected, and we were able to get folks back home safely as soon as possible with no issues whatsoever. The communications were great. We worked with the different departments of the county, and we were able to get people safely.
So tell us a little bit about that coordination. I think that's something that people may not realize, is how closely a transit agency in a natural disaster like this coordinates with the Department of Public Works, the county administrator, like you said. As you know, I used to be one, so I remember doing that, coordinating with everyone. Talk about that and where that all occurs in the EOC and how valuable that is for everyone's in the same room.
Yeah, well, it definitely is extremely valuable. You have every representative from all the different community stakeholders in the community. You had the sheriff department, emergency management. You have representative of fire, rescue, the different departments of the city, public works, engineering, water utilities.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of coordination, and most people don't realize that is happening. But before we can actually bring people back home safely, you have county engineering that has to go out there and look at the roads to make sure that they are completely free of debris so we can safely take them to their destination. We have supervisors out there monitoring the roadways. We have communications with the different community service providers out there, especially if they're managing the shelters, to know that we're able to bring them back on. We just don't simply show up at the shelters and get people to their destination. Something that the county did that I'm proud of is the coordination with the different agencies to make sure that the homeless community were not just left out in the community. So we took buses out there to the different sites, and we identified locations throughout the county that we could pick up the homeless and make sure that communication was thorough. And we were able to transport them safely to the regular shelters. It was just a wonderful coordination. And I'm used to that level of coordination. I think all the transit systems in Florida do a fantastic job to make sure that people are properly served. But it was a great opportunity to see firsthand Palm Beach County and the different stakeholders doing what they do best, and that is to take care of the citizens that we serve.
We wish you the best, my friend. I'm happy that you made it through, even though there was some bad tornado damage. The hurricane itself doesn't sound like the water damage was that bad, and wish you the very best as you continue to kind of get settled there and move forward. And hopefully we'll get a chance to see you in person before the end of the year.
Thank you, sir.
Great to have with us Tiffany Homler Hawkins, who is the CEO of LYNX, which is the public transit system that covers the Orlando area. Thanks for being with us today, Tiffany.
Thanks for having us.
So on today's episode of Transit Unplugged, we're really talking about the value of public transportation during a natural disaster. And you all just had two of them back to back in Florida. Amazing. Tell us about that and the impact it had in the Orlando area.
Well, there are two certain things in Florida. It is going to be hot and humid in the summer, and at some point you are going to be doing some type of hurricane prep or response. And, we were fortunate here in Central Florida, Orange, Seminole, and Osceola County. Helene, we had some winds. We did not shut down service for Helene. Milton, which was catastrophic, both storms, and the whole southeast of the U.S. for Helene. Milton, we shut down for less than 24 hours. And so, this is the things that we prepped for, and at least for our team, and because hurricanes are definitely a given. And so we have a meeting starting in May. Hurricane season is June 1 through November 30th. And so vacation times are limited because unlike snow days in the north for transit systems, we know we're going to have hurricane days. But, for us, our standard policy, and has been for over 20 years, is we pull the buses when the winds are sustained at 35 miles an hour. And so it's the timing of those winds. All of our partners, emergency operations centers, we have the Hurricane models. We have the same models. And so it's a timing issue. It takes us about 3 hours to get all the buses off the routes, refueled and staged so that they're secured. And, we start our 72-hour prep to get our facilities secured and work with our major employers. We have one of the largest single site employers in
Disney.
85,000 employees, Universal.
And do a lot of them ride your bus system to work?
A lot of our passengers are hospitality workers.
Yeah.
And so, we get them out, and we don't want to leave them stranded. So we work with the parks for the timing of closures. We also have a lot of hospital workers that they are on their ride-out crews during an event. So we work with them to find out what their timing is as well to go to Alpha Bravo shifts.
Okay. Oh, yeah, right. So the impact, Helene, sounded like it didn't hit you too bad, but what did Milton do in the Orlando area? Did you get tornadoes like some of the folks in Palm Beach did, that kind of stuff?
No, we had a lot of wind. We had wind gusts of 87 miles an hour at Orlando International. Wow. I think one of the sustained clocked winds was about 65 miles an hour. We did have a lot of rain. The ground was already saturated, so it doesn't have anywhere to go. Some of our areas are still dealing with flooding and rising waters on some of our rivers in the northern part of our service area, and down trees. We did not have the tornadoes like they did down in Palm Beach and Southeast Florida, but it was definitely a wind and rain event for us.
Speaking of flooding, I saw a picture. I don't know if you can comment on it or not, but I don't know if it's true. It seemed like it may be a fake one. I saw a picture of Disney World underwater all over. Was that a fake picture?
From all accounts, it is very much a fake picture.
Okay, yeah, because it didn't seem like you had that much water there in Orlando. So tell me about the day of the storm when you had to shut down. What happened? What did you all do? What was the role of public transit in helping to recover?
So in shutting down, we timed it. We wanted our buses to start coming in about 3 p.m. So our dispatch worked with calling in the outer routes.
Was that on Wednesday, the day the storm was, or Tuesday?
That was on Wednesday, yes.
Okay, yes, that's what I thought. Okay, that's the day it was kind of hitting the West Coast.
It was hitting the West Coast. We were getting the feeder bands.
Okay.
So we made the decision about 3 o'clock to start pulling service. Again, the major parks were closing down at 1 and 2 p.m.
Okay.
And they do work with their staff for those that ride the bus to let them lead first.
Okay.
So get the buses in, get them secured, and then it's a waiting game. And once we can monitor the winds and they start dying down, we work with the public works for all 3 counties. We go out and do roadway assessments to make sure that the buses can get down the road. Obviously, there's going to be light signals out. We had electrical outages, power outages throughout all 3 counties. We're pretty restored by Friday, but on Thursday, about 1:30, we did the all call for folks to report. We have a alert system, robocalls, an employee hotline to keep everybody informed. And I will say that's one thing about the employees at LYNX is they are all on board. they understand our role in the community. And a lot of times during events, holidays, take it out of the natural disaster, you have a lot of call-offs. We didn't have any for Helene and Milton.
Wow.
So everybody steps up. And again, it's our response. It's how, once the buses are rolling and traffic lights are back, there's a sense of normalcy that comes with, okay, I may have had damage. Hurricane fatigue is real.
Yeah.
But it gets back to, okay, the sun came up the next day and, we're responding and we're getting back to what we do.
So it really speaks to the role of public transportation as an essential service, right?
Absolutely.
And it sounds like your employees get that too. They understand their role in it.
They understand the role, they understand the assignment. And, during COVID, we were all talking about, the bus operators and bus operations is essential. They're first responders.
That's right.
And, we went to half service for about 6 weeks during COVID, and then we were back at full service. Now, ridership was not back full, and, we're about 85-90% back. But, it's the demographics of our riders who need us the most.
That's great. First of all, I just want to say, Sid, I love your transit system. We were down there last year and I got to ride it and see your one of your central hubs. For those of you who'd like to see LYNX a little bit closer up, we did do a TV show there, Transit Unplugged TV, where we feature Tiffany and her team and her transit system. Just give us a quick update since then for those who kind of keep pace with us. What's the latest generally, not talking about the hurricanes, but what's happening with your transit system generally now?
So Orange County is putting about $6 million more a year into service. We'll have more service in and around Metro Orlando. LYNX Central Station is going to be celebrating its 20th anniversary in November. And the skyline of Orlando 20 years ago is a lot different than it is today. And so we are doing a refresh at the terminal and bus bays and looking forward to celebrating the 20th anniversary and the end of hurricane season in November.
Yeah, when is that? When is the end of hurricane season? Is there a specific day?
Officially, it's November 30th.
Okay.
But we have been known to have a few in December.
Wow. Well, hopefully you don't have any more this year. I mean, you've had more than your share. And Tiffany, your leadership there, I think, is just, it shows how, some of the other folks were saying this too, Brad was saying how professional the response is in Florida to a hurricane. It's not like, oh my gosh, what are we going to do? Everybody knows exactly what they're going to do. You guys have drills, you plan, and then you just execute. And your team sounds like they get it.
Yeah, it's the execution, and we have our own EOC, and it helps us coordinate with the 3 counties when those requests come in for shelter service. We do not charge a fare if you're going to a shelter. And so
that's good.
It's the messaging and the IT team, the communications team, operations. They've all been long tenured employees. Like none of them have been there less than 10 years that sit at that table and help make those decisions and make sure that we're firing on all cylinders.
That's great. Well, thanks for giving us an update today, Tiffany.
Well, thanks for having us.
Great to have with us on the line today Greg Slater, who is CEO and Executive Director of the Tampa Hillsborough Expressway Authority. Greg, thanks for joining us.
Absolutely. Happy to, Paul.
Greg and I were old colleagues. We used to work together at State DOT. He was the head of State Highways. I was the head of Transit. And then after I left, he became Secretary of the whole State Transportation Department, man. Way to go.
It's a fun ride.
And so a couple years ago, maybe almost 3 years ago, you went down to Florida?
I did. It was an opportunity that kind of came to me in Florida. Some of the transportation agencies, including the transit agencies, are special districts. And so throughout the state, there's a handful of special districts of the state who, we're solely supported by toll revenue, and we do a variety of transportation projects. We have a greenway, we have some local roadways, some boulevards, but it's all funded off of the revenue that comes from the toll facility.
Interesting. So you guys, I mean, the theme of today's show is basically, resilience, how public transportation and the highway network play such a critical role kind of in societal safety when it comes to these big hurricanes you got down there in Florida. Tell us about what happened, these 2 back-to-back hurricanes, and how you all responded.
Well, you look at that 2 major hurricanes. The first one, 100 miles away from us, still had tremendous impacts in terms of the water surge. you learn very quickly about which side of the hurricane you want to be on when it's coming across the Gulf, depending on whether you're going to get water pushed into you or water pulled away from you in terms of the rotation of the storm. But in both cases, the preparation is still the same. So you come in, you've got these 4 or 5 days, even 10 days out, you're watching these storms develop. You got like an invest system now that's kind of floating around, whether it's going to make it to the Gulf or not.
Oh, yeah.
What you do is you start to track those. And then a couple of days out, okay, do I have enough contractual resources? Are all of my drainage inlets clear of debris? What do they look like in terms of whether we're going to get impacts from water or whether it's resilient? But then coming out of those two storms couldn't have been very different for us. So it was, so when we came out of Helene the first storm had a lot of water issues, a lot of flooding, a lot of drainage systems that just handled much more than they were designed to do. So washouts and those types of things that we're repairing. Coming out of Milton, because we're on the other side of the storm, we had rainfall, tremendous amounts of rainfall, but it was all wind. We've got signs that are twisted. We've got power lights that are down. We still got significant portion of our system that's still running on backup generator. We still don't have power in the system. So, it's about resiliency. And when you look at us and the people that we serve, the network is the network. So, we, other than our streetcar system here in Tampa, the system is really a bus-based system. So you've got a lot of transit facilities and transit services that are running not only on our system, but the FDOT system and the local system, Pinellas and Hillsborough County, as well as St. Petersburg and the city of Tampa. So we've got to work together as an all hands on deck to make sure the system functions so that we can not only evacuate the way we need to evacuate, get people to safe places like shelters, but then recover in a way where you were running fuel supplies up and down the corridor. We had tremendous fuel shortages because the port got shut down.
So tell us about the evacuation and people using your roads. I mean, tell us a little bit about your road network that you oversee, and then, how did it perform?
Yeah, we performed pretty well. So, what happens under a state of emergency is the governor will actually suspend the collection of tolls.
Okay.
During the state of emergency. So there's no charge to use the system. Our system, for the most part, is elevated. So it's pretty resilient from a water perspective, but we're not so high elevated that we're not resilient from a wind perspective. But as we connect to the other systems, so the 3 bridges really across the water between Tampa and St. Petersburg, all 3 of them are owned by the Florida Department of Transportation. So they coordinate with us and say, hey, this one's going to be shut down soon, or this one's going to be shut down soon. And then what we do is, for instance, one of them on the southern side that goes over into downtown St. Petersburg headed towards Tropicana Field. So that one was going to be shut down. So what we needed to do is get out there and shut off the access to the elevated part of the expressway that goes to it so people don't get trapped on it and are able to turn around. The challenge for us is a lot of the system underneath of us was being flooded at the same time. So you got to kind of work it together.
How do you even get there? Yeah, but flooded.
That's right.
Wow. That's something, Greg. And you were mentioning, like, when you and I were in Maryland together, we had a big snowstorm. And I remember you and I had to coordinate to respond to that. But you said it's kind of different than, tell us about that, how it's different.
It's absolutely different. I remember, I think we were calling it Snowmageddon at some point.
That's right.
It was like 3 blizzards in like a 6-day span or something.
Yeah.
But, when you work a snowstorm, and I worked many, many over the course of my 25 years there, your goal is to really, although people stay in during those snowstorms, many don't. So the goal is to keep the system moving while the storm is being out there. You're issuing warnings and saying, please don't go out, please don't go out. But the idea was to keep it mobile. So, hospital workers can get to the hospital, so the supply chain can keep moving. With a hurricane, once you get to 30, 40 miles an hour, you're pulling even your crews off the system and saying, hey, we're in a mandatory evacuation zone. You're kind of on your own.
Yeah.
And then first light, you go back out and start working on the recovery. But the goal is to not keep the system moving through a hurricane because it's not safe to do that. And so although we have bridges closed and those types of things, there's nobody out there to actually physically stop you from going across that bridge if you decide to go out. But if you run into an issue, you're kind of on your own. It becomes an emergency management type of an issue. But it really is a very, very different type of approach to managing a hurricane versus a snowstorm. It's like, all right, let's take the pause and then let's figure out how we can get out there first light to work on the recovery and assess the damage and inspect all your bridges and those types of things. You wouldn't have to do that in a snowstorm.
That's right. I guess last question would be, Greg, talk about the coordination you had with the public transit agencies down there. Because obviously they're driving on your roads.
They are. And there's a lot of coordination that happens between us and them, as well as FDOT and the city and the counties, because they're all kind of separate. And the system is like a patchwork of who owns what. But the transit systems are running on either our system or an FDOT system or a county system. So through an emergency operations center, a lot of that coordination happens. Although transit service was running to get people to shelters and those types of things through the storm, it's about how do you ramp it back up when you get power restoration? How do you ramp it back up to get people back to their kind of daily lives, but also to keep that supply chain going? So it really is an all hands on deck communication exercise as much as it is an operations exercise, saying, you know, somebody like Hart will come out and say, hey, we're going to start this service back up, or PSDA saying, we're going to start this service back up. We got to make sure the road's open, and we got to make sure we have the system in place to be able to run your routes. Because we still have a tremendous amount of people without power. We still have a tremendous amount of our system that has, you know, a foot plus of standing water as the creeks are rising and those types of things. So those routes, as you know, Paul, you can't redesign those routes on the fly. You know, they work when they work. And so you've got to make sure that that route is open. It's not as much us coordinating with them, but it is them coordinating with us and saying, hey, do I have a whole route here that I can restore?
Right.
You know,
or is there standing water 3 feet tall on a hunk of it? Yeah. Wow, Greg. Well, man, we wish you the very best and congratulations on the work you did do. I was able to see even in the media how well you guys responded to this wild storm. I mean, the roof of Tropicana Stadium being ripped off, the 100 tornadoes or so that came through the area, and you guys, were able to minimize the impact to the great majority of the area. Congratulations and best wishes as you continue to recover.
Thank you, Paul.
Thank you for being with us for this very special edition of Transit Unplugged from the eye of the storm, talking about emergency preparedness in the wake of Hurricanes Helene and Milton in Florida. I'd like to thank our guests, Brad Miller, Dave Dech, Coree Lonergan, Ivan Maldonado, Tiffany Homler Hawkins, and Greg Slater. We really appreciate them taking this time to speak with us right now, still in the midst of a disaster. Hi, I'm Tris Hussey, editor of the Transit Unplugged podcast. Now, coming up next week on the show, we stay in Florida, in Miami specifically, and we talk with Schneider St. Preux, who's one of the recipients of Mass Transit's 40 Under 40 awards this year. But Schneider also has an amazing career trajectory. He started out as a bus operator over a dozen years ago, and he's worked his way up to be General Superintendent of Bus Operations for the Department of Transportation and Public Works for Miami-Dade County. Now, what does he credit his career success to? Hard work, dedication, education, and Transit Unplugged. Tune in to hear his entire story and his advice for those of you who also want to climb the career ladder. Transit Unplugged is brought to you by Modaxo. At Modaxo, we're passionate about moving the world's people, and at Transit Unplugged, we're passionate about telling those stories. So until next week, ride safe and ride happy.